All right, welcome to another deep dive where we do exactly that.
We dive deep.
Into your source
So
material
that's right.
to bring you all the juicy insights and really get to the core of what's going on.
Part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Today's a particularly fascinating one.
Yes, it is.
We've got excerpts from Tara Westover's memoir, Educated.
It is quite a story.
It is a huge story.
And the excerpts you've sent are really fascinating, I think.
They are, and for those who maybe haven't encountered it yet, it's her story of growing up in rural Idaho and her journey from really having a very limited formal education to eventually going to university.
Yeah.
And it's a really powerful story of resilience and finding your own path.
Yeah, and I think that idea of resilience and carving out your own path in the world,
Yeah.
that's one of the things that we're going to come back to a lot, I think, in this deep dive.
Yeah.
Um, so today we really want to explore those early experiences, those
Yeah.
formative experiences that she had, the unique and often challenging environment that she was raised in.
Yeah, yeah, and we're really going to be looking at everything from the family dynamics to the singular way of life that she describes in such vivid detail.
Yeah, and you've given us such a fascinating window into a world that I think a lot of people might find unfamiliar.
Yeah. Okay, so let's unpack this, starting with the mountain itself, right? Buck's Peak.
Right.
It seems to be so much more than just a location. It's almost like a character
Yeah, definitely. It's central,
in the family's life.
yeah, to their identity and sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And there's that story that the father tells, where he describes the mountain as this cathedral,
Yeah.
with the impression of a woman's body.
With her legs as ravines and hair, a spray of pines. I mean,
Yeah, it really elevates the mountain beyond just this geographical feature.
it doesn't it makes it so powerful. So almost like a sentient presence.
Yeah, definitely.
And then there's the cyclical nature of life she describes this life tied to the day and the seasons. So there's this sense of routine, but also paradoxically of things never really changing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really important point because
Yeah.
if we connect that to the bigger picture, then you see how this isolated environment really fosters this insular worldview.
Yeah.
Um, and even something like the naming conventions, Grandma down the hill, Grandma over in town,
They're so evocative.
it really highlights that self-contained world.
Yeah, and how they orient themselves within it.
Yeah.
It's as if the world outside that mountain is secondary or irrelevant to their daily lives.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's interesting you mentioned the grandmothers because there's that strained relationship between the father and grandma down the hill.
Right.
They're constantly at odds yet bonded by this shared devotion to the mountain. And it's an interesting kind of look at the complexity of family ties.
Right, and how an environment can shape even familial disagreements.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you've also got the contrast of the father's unfinished yellow house and his junkyard right next to Grandma's manicured lawn.
Oh, yeah.
So you've got that visual representation of their differing values, even while rooted in the same place.
Yeah, it really makes you think about what common ground that they had. I mean, was it just that mountain holding them together through all of those personal conflicts?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so now we're moving into education, right? And it's clear from Tara's accounts that her understanding of school at this young age is very limited. It seems to be mostly in the realm of Sunday school, and not a particularly positive experience if we remember her interaction with the other children about not being able to read.
Yeah, and I think that really highlights that contrast between her limited exposure and then the surprising offer from Grandma down the hill to put her in school without the father knowing.
That's huge, right?
It is.
It's like this idea of there being a pathway out of that world, even if it has to be done in secret.
Yeah.
So even within this family, there are these cracks and different viewpoints.
Yeah.
But of course, we bump right up against the father's emphasis on self-reliance and his deep distrust of the government.
Right.
And it really sets up this tension between the outside world and the family's isolated beliefs.
Exactly.
And then we have those head for the hills bags.
Yeah.
With the herbal medicines and the water purifiers and
Amory's flint and steel. I mean,
yeah, it's like everything you would need to just completely cut yourself off.
right, be completely self-sufficient.
Yeah, and it really shows you that mindset of preparedness, right? This
Yeah.
anticipation of needing to separate from mainstream society.
Yeah, definitely.
And it feels like that push for self-reliance extends to to the mother's role as well, because we see the father kind of pushing her to become a midwife.
Right. And it wasn't necessarily her own desire initially.
No, no.
But he frames it as this calling from the Lord.
Which is a powerful justification to kind of override her reluctance.
Absolutely.
And integrate that role into their spiritual beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have this image of like the lime green fetal heart monitor
Right.
sitting there next to her traditional herbal remedies, which is just such a striking image.
It really is.
That tension between their self-imposed isolation and these practical realities.
It was like this clash of the old and the new.
Yeah, yeah.
But it seems like they were willing to use modern technology when it served their needs.
Yeah, in a very pragmatic way.
Yeah.
So we're seeing these cracks in that isolation.
Right.
Another aspect of that is the lack of official documentation, right? And we see this when Luke needs a birth certificate for driver's ed, and we find out that the younger 4 children don't have them.
Yeah, that really speaks volumes about their disconnect from mainstream institutions and the difficulties it created for them.
Yeah.
Her mother isn't even certain about Tara's birth date.
Oh.
And then they get these dismissive reactions from officials on the phone.
It's like they don't really exist.
Right. They lack that formal identity.
Yeah. Yeah, and Tara even says, you can't be a person without a birthday.
Yeah.
Which is just, it shows you how foreign that concept was to her as a child.
Right.
That whole idea of birthdays being this fluid, changeable thing.
Yeah.
And then she gets this delayed certificate of birth, which she describes as dispossessing almost.
Yeah. It's like this official recognition that doesn't align with her lived experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it really makes you think, how did this lack of formal recognition shape her early sense of self?
Yeah, and her place in a wider world that she doesn't really know about yet.
Yeah, definitely.
So we also get a glimpse into the realities of childbirth within this isolated setting.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that when Tara witnesses a birth early on, and she has this idea of it being mythic and romantic. But then it quickly becomes something that she dislikes.
Right.
Because of its exhausting and frankly unpleasant nature.
Well, childbirth is
it is
very messy.
Yeah. And that kind of contrasts with the mother's experience later on, where we have that dangerously low fetal heart rate and that high-speed drive to the hospital.
Yeah, and that really underscores those potential risks of their limited access to conventional medical care.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it makes you think about all those car accidents they had.
Yeah.
It makes you think, are they really safe?
You're driving all over the place.
Yeah,
like
in those old vehicles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's also that mention of Judy's visit and Maria's stories.
Right.
And it hints at this network connected to the mother's herbalism. So it shows that even though they're somewhat isolated,
right,
there are connections.
Yeah, they're not completely cut off
to the outside.
No,
right.
Through their beliefs.
Right. It's just within the framework of those alternative practices.
Yeah. So let's talk about the grandmothers, right? Because we have Grandma Fay, the mother's mother,
right,
who seems to have had this strong desire to create a perfect family.
Yeah.
To shield her daughters from social contempt.
Yeah. So she's really concerned with respectability.
Yeah.
Which is, you see that in the white picket fence and the handmade clothes.
Yeah, and she's really thinking about their social standing.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting given the family's more insular approach.
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
And then her daughter, Faye, the mother, seems to have kind of rebelled against that respectability.
Right.
While still maintaining her Mormon faith.
Right.
So it's an interesting...
Did a nuance in her character.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, we have the grandfather, Grandpa, who's got this short temper, this rugged nature.
Right.
And it makes you think about the father's strong opinions about women working outside the home.
Right, because his own mother worked for the Farm Bureau.
Yeah.
So it makes you think maybe his stance was less about religious doctrine and more about those personal experiences.
Yeah, and maybe even a reaction against his own upbringing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so as Tara grows up, we start to see this escalating paranoia in the father connected to his fundamentalism.
Yeah.
And it seems to lead to this pattern of cutting off relationships.
Right.
Like the second severing of mother and daughter.
Yeah, and that really highlights how rigid his belief system is.
Mm.
And it makes you think about that car accident with Tyler falling asleep at the wheel too,
Yeah.
because it seems separate.
Yeah.
But it also, I think, speaks to some of the consequences of their lifestyle.
Yeah.
Those long drives, maybe they were fatigued.
Right. Yeah. And then there's that trip to Arizona to care for the father.
Right, where he's likened to a sunflower.
Yeah, needing sun. Yeah, and when they get there, he's silent and still.
It really makes you wonder what was going on beneath the surface
Yeah. Yeah.
of his strong beliefs.
Yeah, so then we see this shift in his belief system
Yeah.
regarding the mother's herbs.
Right.
And he starts to use this term Illuminati
Yeah.
to explain perceived threats, even including Grandma down the hill.
Right, yeah.
And this feels like a real escalation of his paranoia.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, it really added that conspiratorial element to his worldview.
Yeah.
And it really kind of provided a framework for him to understand any opposition or disagreement as part of this larger hidden agenda.
It's like a catch-all.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, another car accident. And,
Yeah.
and this one is with the whole family.
Right.
And the way she describes it, the sounds, her mother's scream, the
Yeah.
violent jolt, I mean, it's really visceral. And the father's immediate concern is about the downed power lines.
Right, which speaks to his survival-oriented mindset.
Yeah, even in the midst of this traumatic event.
Yeah.
And the mother is injured, her eyes are swollen and bruised, and she's even calling Tara by her sister's name.
Right, which could mean she was disoriented
Yeah.
after the accident.
Yeah, and then we have Tyler making that announcement that he's going to college.
Yeah.
And the way he struggles to get those words out,
I know.
you can just feel the weight of this decision.
Right.
And the father's reaction is almost worse than an outburst, right? He just has this folded, impassive expression.
And this long silence.
Yeah.
That just speaks volumes.
Yeah, and then he gives his views on college. It's extra school for people too dumb to learn the first time around.
Right. And the professors are either agents of the Illuminati.
Yeah, or ignorant liars.
Yeah.
It's just a totally different worldview.
Yeah.
And then amidst all this tension, right.
Tyra finds this connection with Kyler through music.
Yeah.
And she talks about listening to that CD over and over again.
All right.
And it becomes this form of nonverbal communication between them.
Right. Which is so powerful.
It is.
Especially given his speech impediment.
Yeah, and his quiet nature.
Yeah, it's like they found this shared language.
Yeah.
Outside of direct conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting to note that there are these different views on education within the family.
Right.
Tara and Richard seem to have this affinity for book learning.
Yeah.
Which is unlike the other siblings and certainly unlike the father.
Right, who prioritizes those practical skills.
Yeah, and it's like that conflict that we saw earlier with the mother and the father.
Right, her idealism about education versus his focus on junkyard work.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like these different philosophies playing out over time.
And it never really went away, did it?
No, it didn't.
No.
And the homeschooling efforts were so inconsistent.
They were never what she initially envisioned.
No. And then we see the father actively interfering with Tyler's studies,
right?
Demanding help in the junkyard. It's just so clear what his priorities are.
They are, yeah.
And Tara's reaction is just to skitter away.
Right.
Whereas Tyler is much steadier,
Yeah.
and he tries to negotiate study time.
Yeah.
But you get that image of the father's voice rising from the floor while Tyler's just silently eating.
Yeah.
It's such a powerful dynamic.
It really is.
Yeah. And then as Tyler's getting ready to leave for college,
right,
the father's just in denial.
Yeah, he refuses to hire a replacement.
Yeah, and then Tyler takes Tara to visit their maternal grandparents.
Right.
Which is such a different environment.
It's a stark contrast.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
To Buck's Peak.
Yeah, and then we get to Y2K, and the father's anxieties are just through the roof.
Yeah.
Right back to head for the hills mode. And he decides to convert all their savings into silver and gold coins,
right,
which is just so indicative of his distrust of traditional systems.
Exactly. Yeah.
And even Tyler's buying silver.
Yeah. So there's this shared concern within the family.
Yeah. And then there's this seemingly minor interaction with Grandma down the hill,
right,
about hand washing.
Yeah.
That turns into this huge disagreement about hygiene practices.
Yeah, and the way the mother raised her children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's these little things that reveal these deeper tensions,
Right.
you
So,
know?
yeah.
And then for young Tara, the junkyard is this playground in her mind.
Right.
But then that changes dramatically when
Yeah.
the father throws those metal objects at her.
Yeah.
And she's injured.
That's a pivotal moment.
It is.
For her.
Yeah, it suddenly becomes a place of danger.
Yeah.
And she even describes the blood pattern on the ice.
Yeah.
Which is just such a visual reminder of that shift. And then we see the mother having doubts about continuing as a midwife.
Right after that hospital incident.
Yeah.
Where there were potential health issues.
Yeah, and the father's really disappointed.
He is.
But she eventually convinces herself to continue, even though she's having these health challenges during the births.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because the mother always told Tara that she could go to school if she asked the father, but Tara never did.
Yeah.
And she talks about how it was like her curiosity was this obscenity. It's just so telling of the power that he had over her.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. And then we have that horrific accident with Dad and Luke preparing cars for the crusher and the gasoline and the cutting torch.
Yeah.
And Luke's engulfed in flames.
Yeah, that's a horrifying scene.
It is. And Tara's reaction is so childlike.
Right.
Asking if she should make him cold or hot.
Yeah.
And then trying to put his leg in a garbage can full of cold water.
Yeah, well-intentioned,
yeah,
but misguided.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the mother is calm, but kind of perplexed by her methods.
Right.
But then they just spend the evening tending to his burn at home, cutting away dead flesh.
Yeah.
It's a really disturbing scene.
It is.
And the mother even says it was the worst burn she'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And they're giving him all these home remedies for his fever and for pain, and they even have these conflicting memories about the incident. You know, Luke remembers it a bit differently from Tara and Richard.
Yeah, and that, I think, really speaks to the unreliability of memory.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. And especially in a situation like that.
Yeah.
So much trauma.
Yeah.
And then we see Tara trying to get away from the junkyard, similar to Audrey.
Right.
And she goes to the post office to get a job.
Yeah.
And even there we see the father's opinions about, you know, the local ordinance for dog ownership.
Right.
And then she starts taking dance lessons from Caroline Moyle.
Yeah.
And keeps it a secret from her father.
Right.
But then he shows up at the recital.
Yeah.
Which is so unexpected.
It is.
But his reaction is so stiff and impassive.
Right, yeah.
It's like he's disapproving, but he's trying to hide it.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then after the recital, he blows up about the costume being immodest, and he accuses the mother.
Yeah.
And then later the mother expresses guilt to Tara.
Right.
So it's like they're playing these roles
Yeah.
to manage his reactions.
Yeah.
So then they're trying to find another activity for Tara.
Right.
And the mother suggests voice lessons.
Yeah.
Which are expensive.
Right.
But the father overhears Tara singing.
Yeah.
And offers to find the money for her to audition for Annie.
Which is so surprising.
It is, right? Especially because he's in full Y2K prep mode.
Right, yeah.
But it's like maybe the impending doom made those restrictions seem less important.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. And speaking of Y2K, they are really preparing boiling, skinning, pressure cooking food, storing it all in a root cellar.
Right.
And the father's even digging a pit to bury a 1,000-gallon tank.
Right.
It's unbelievable, the level of preparation.
Yeah.
And then Tara meets Jessica,
Right.
whose parents also pulled her from school.
Right.
And it's like Tara's getting this little glimpse into what a normal life might be like.
Right.
But it feels so foreign to her.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
Yeah. And then she starts participating in school plays.
Right.
And the father is surprisingly into it.
Yeah, he's totally absorbed.
Yeah.
Even buying tickets for multiple nights.
Yeah, and talking about it in church instead of his usual topics.
Yeah.
So it's this real shift for him.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then he's doing target practice with a rifle after sunset, which he explains as defense.
Right.
And then we have this interaction with Charles.
Yeah.
play rehearsal, who suggests she join the choir.
Yeah.
And she's just watching him interacting with his friends.
Right.
And it sparks this idea in her mind of what a different reality might be like.
Yeah.
But then Y2K comes and goes.
Right.
And it's completely anticlimactic. They're watching the honeymooners and
Right.
waiting for disaster to strike, and nothing happens.
Yeah.
And the father is just so disappointed.
Yeah, it's almost childlike disappointment.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another car accident.
Oh.
This time the van overturns.
Right.
And Tara wakes up in the dark and she's completely disoriented.
Right.
And her family's not there.
Yeah.
It's scary.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks after the accident, the mother shows up.
Yeah.
And she's telling Tara to imagine this white bubble for protection and peace.
Right.
And she tells her to picture a Mormon temple and Luke's deceased goat.
It's just this strange mix of spiritual and unconventional healing methods.
Yeah. And then Sean shows up.
Right.
And he's holding her upright and adjusting her body. But Tara misinterprets this as him being like a protector.
Right, like a father figure?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we see Sean's horsemanship.
Right.
His gentle approach with the yearling using the saddle first.
Yeah.
It's a different side to him, right?
Certainly.
And then they're working with Bud,
Right.
who's this skittish horse.
Inexperienced.
Yeah. And there's that moment where he rears and bucks and Tara instinctively hangs on.
Right.
And then Tara goes with Sean on this long haul trucking trip.
Right.
Because Tony's wife is sick.
Right.
And she hasn't really seen much of the world outside of her valley.
Yeah.
And they invent this wordplay game.
Sidelister.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To pass the time.
Right.
But we also see Sean's controlling behavior,
Right.
Holding up that other truck driver.
Yeah, that had cut them off.
Yeah, and then they get back, and Sean decides to audition for Carousel along with Tara and Charles.
Right.
And that's where they meet Sadie, who's interested in Sean. And he just manipulates her so cruelly, using these seemingly simple requests that just escalate.
Yeah, and waste her time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's that really disturbing incident in the bathroom where Sean forces Tara's face into the toilet bowl after she's looked at his pornography.
Yeah.
And then he makes her do this painful bow.
Yeah.
It's a clear act of violence and humiliation.
It is.
And then at Audrey's wedding,
Right.
the father makes that ominous revelation about the final struggle for the Holy Land and his sons going to war.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that apocalyptic worldview again.
Yeah.
And then Tara avoids Sean,
Right.
but he apologizes, and Tara forgives him.
But it's fueled by fear.
Yeah, of the end of the world.
Right. And she even says it wasn't genuine at first.
Right.
It's like she was trying to protect herself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then she's experiencing these physical changes as she gets older.
Right.
And she feels like her body doesn't belong to her anymore.
Right.
And it leads to this increased self-awareness.
Yeah.
But Sean reacts so negatively to her attempts at self-expression,
Right.
Wearing mascara and lip gloss, and he's calling her these derogatory nicknames.
Yeah.
And then the violence escalates again.
Yeah. To that brutal attack.
Yeah, and the mother's there pleading for him to stop.
Yeah.
But then Tyler arrives.
Yeah.
And confronts Sean.
Yeah, and Sean backs down.
Yeah, and Tyler asks Tara if she's going to leave.
Right.
And she's hopeful, but Tyler's skeptical.
Yeah, because it's happened before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Tara tries to put a lock on her bedroom door.
Right.
And Sean shows up and gives her advice about using the right screws.
Yeah.
It's just so confusing, right?
It is this mix of hatred and pity that she feels.
Right.
And then Tyler calls, urging her to study for the ACT.
Right.
But Tara's dismissing college at this point.
Right. She's thinking about a traditional life.
Yeah, on the farm.
Right.
And then we see that Sean's physical appearance is normal after his head injury.
Right.
But his speech has changed, and he's telling these nonsensical stories. So it's like there's this damage underneath the surface.
Yeah.
And then the father makes this unexpected visit.
Right.
And he's giving her this intense, unsettling gaze.
Yeah, and condemning her pursuit of of knowledge.
Yeah.
Man's knowledge.
Yeah, and predicting Dodd's wrath.
Yeah.
And then Tara returns to the junkyard.
Right.
And it's changed. You know, there are these stacks of angle iron from dismantled utility towers.
Yeah.
And she's studying before work. She's so determined.
She is.
Yeah, and she's lacking confidence in science,
Right.
but she's registered for the ACT with this really high target score.
Yeah. And she sees those girls in town.
Yeah.
You know, just this fleeting glimpse of a different world.
All right.
And then there's that terrifying incident with the shear.
Yeah.
Where she's almost crushed.
Right.
And Sean shows up.
Yeah.
And defies their father.
Yeah.
By working alongside her on the shear for a month.
Yeah.
And insisting on safety measures.
Yeah.
Which is just so unexpected.
It is.
But it's really taking a toll on him physically because of his head injury.
Right.
And then they're talking about college.
Right.
And Tara expresses her fear of being brainwashed.
Yeah.
And Sean surprisingly trusts her judgment, which is so different from the father.
Yeah.
And then Sean's motorcycle accident and his head injury.